views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, it's time for the Bronx Buzz. This is the program that gives you a chance to learn more about Bronx journalists, learn more about what they're thinking about, what they're writing about, give you a little bit more insight as to what they're reporting on and kind of like what really is going on in the Bronx. And today we're going to start the program with kind of an alternative version of that because we're going to turn one of our elected officials into a reporter. And so it is my pleasure to welcome to you Senator Gustavo Rivera. And it's nice to have you with us, Senator Rivera. Always good to talk to you.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Gary.
Katrina's running the camera, which actually is I guess, an appropriate bridge because we're going to use you to be a reporter for what is going on in Puerto Rico. Now, I know you haven't been there. Do you have family there? Have you talked to friends? I mean, give me what your interaction with the island of Puerto Rico has been since Hurricane Maria.
Well, folks might not know, but I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. My parents are still there, both of them. My older brother is as well. A bunch of extended family, uncles, aunts, etc., cousins, and what have you, and a lot of friends who live there, so I've been in contact with most of them. My family is fine. My mom is keeping her humor. She says she's on her fall diet. She's lost about 7 pounds so far because of the food rationing that has had to happen. But what I can tell you is that from all the conversations that I've had with them, friends of mine who are down there, as well as trusted people who have traveled down there to aid and then have come back, it is really bad. It is worse than you can think. The idea that we are 26, 27 days in after the storm. We're coming up on a month, Gary, and over 85% of the island still has no electricity. There is, most water pumps are run by electricity, so that means no running water. There are towns that, as of yesterday, we still had towns that where family members still had not heard anything. They're completely incommunicado. You have there's an electrical grid that is completely destroyed. There have been at least 6 days when there have been flash flood warnings since the storm.
Wow.
So you have the idea that, and what you've had above all is an inept and frankly heartless federal response. I understand that FEMA's job is to be a coordinating agency. Right? They can say, we're not supposed to do everything for people. Well, certainly you're not. What you are supposed to do is coordinate, and they have done a piss-poor job of that.
Let me just break some of it down, and we'll go back to the...
It's a little bit emotional.
I know it is, and as you know, I ran into you the other night, and that's how we started off with the idea of bringing you on the show. You started out by saying you have been in contact with your parents and family. Was that an easy thing to do, or did you simply pick up the phone and eventually get them, or did you have to make some connections? You have to pull strings because after all, you are a senator, or like how did that work, and why were they able to get through when so many have not been able to get through?
Well, they were able to do so because we only got in contact with them during the day of the storm. My father texted me and my younger brother in the morning, and then we did not hear from them for about 3 days. My father had to go cell phone signal hunting. There was a single, it is for people that have been in Puerto Rico, they kind of don't realize how much vegetation is all around. Now consider all of it is gone, so it was easy enough for them to find the only cell tower that was still operating in their neighborhood. So they parked around the cell tower like 20 or 30 other cars, and they just waited there to get enough signal to be able to have a 2-3 minute conversation with us. This was a couple of days after the storm.
Right.
Days after that, then they managed to get some limited power back in my parents' home, which has a generator, and we've been talking every couple of days since then. But you are correct. There are many people who have not been
No chance.
Who still have not been able to speak to their family members or friends.
So let me ask you this. Now, among the myriad of concerns are the people that you referenced who are incommunicado because they are far away. They may be in towns and either roads were cut off and communication lines were cut off. It seems in this day and age somewhat inconceivable that that could be the case. Do we have any status update? Can we just kind of assume things are not going well? And then, of course, ultimately, how are we going to reach them? I mean, I'd assume there's helicopters or other things that could fly over and drop rations and get medical attention and all those other things. I guess so. It's a two-part question. How are we doing that? And number two, can we do that? And is that one way that we're going to kind of rescue these people?
How are we doing that? Not too well. As far, for example, you talked about helicopters dropping supplies.
Rations.
Think about that for a second. There's actually a few videos of this, things that were happening as recently as about 5 or 6 days ago, where there were some towns that were not very reachable. So the helicopter would come and would drop supplies off in the middle of a ball field, and then would leave it there. There was no one on the ground to be able to stop the hundreds of people who have not. If somebody has not been fed or had water for 3, 4, 5 days, then you put supplies in the middle of a ball field, then people are going to go at it as if there was the Lord of the Flies. So
right.
The efforts here at any type of situation like this, and again, it is not my specialty to do disaster preparedness or respond after a disaster, but people who I've spoken to whose specialty it is tell me that some of the most basic things have been ignored or not done. There's things called PODs, or points of distribution, for example. These are when there is a disaster of this kind, the National Guard is tasked with establishing a geographic location in each one of, in this case, municipalities, and they would be responsible for receiving packages, right, receiving supplies that would be brought in by trucks that would be manned by Department of Defense, staffed by Department of Defense people. Then they would distribute it in each one of the municipalities. As of 2 days ago, it has still not been done.
After 26 days, that's incredible.
26 days. It is maddening.
And so
it's not. Go ahead.
Can you explain? Is there any explanation? Is there any reasonable explanation? Any understanding of why FEMA and the federal government has not been mobilized in this way to support the relief effort?
There is no reasonable explanation, Gary, none whatsoever, except to think, and this is, I think that this has been made more clear by this than any other thing. This is a white supremacist administration, and I will say it bluntly and clearly. These are brown and black folk, much like what happened during Katrina in New Orleans. These are brown and black folk that are being ignored by a federal government that could have established basic things of transportation, of communications, and they failed miserably. That has to do with leadership right at the top.
At the top,
Sir, you've run organizations, even small organizations, right? Offices. If you manage 2 or 3 people, the tenure of that particular office is determined by you, the principal. Right. I know, because I have a staff of 11 people who get their tenor of how they approach the constituency that I serve from me. Right. So if you can bet anything that in a situation like this, if you had a president that actually gave a damn, he or she would just basically get in a room and say, you point at somebody, you are going to do this.
Yeah,
you are going to do this.
Senator, before we run out of time, I know you have been spending, I'm guessing, 24/7 trying to coordinate a relief effort to the best that you can within your sphere. Talk to me about what you've been able to do, and then, of course, a message to our friends and neighbors in the Bronx about what they can do to support this incredibly important effort. I mean, these are human beings, and Neither you
Absolutely.
nor I really care who they are, but they have to be fed and rescued in every way, shape, or form. That's just all it is, you know.
I would suggest that everyone continue to pay attention to this. This is not something that is going to go away overnight. It needs to be close to the front pages or on the front pages as much as possible. This is an ongoing humanitarian crisis, the likes of which our country has not seen, and we need to pay attention to it. That's number one. What I've been doing the last couple of weeks, much like many of my colleagues, credit where credit is due, whether it's the governor or Governor Andrew Cuomo or the mayor, as well as our borough president or Assembly member Marcos Crespo, or State Senator Ruben Diaz Senior. All these folks have been bringing our relationships to bear and trying to make sure that resources get down there, and that people that have skills that would be useful, medical personnel, folks that can that are in construction, etc., can actually get down there. What I would suggest to folks at this point, sending more material would not be the best way to do it. Meaning, there's a lot of drop-off locations that have been set up by the city and the state, and we have moved. The city and the state, through joint efforts, have moved millions of pounds of supplies down there. Sadly, most of it is stuck. There is a pipeline that
is something that we've heard, is that, you know, they got stuck, and then there were goods that spoiled and all those kinds of things.
That is factual, Gary.
Right. So before we run out of time, what are we telling people to do? Do they give money? Should they bring?
Yes, there's two. I would say two quick things. You do make sure that you do your research and that you give to organizations that you trust. Two that I think are absolutely essential. Acacia Networks, that is a Bronx-based nonprofit. Right. They have put up a website called DonatePuertoRico.com. DonatePuertoRico.com. That organization, every dollar would go to fund organizations on the ground in Puerto Rico that are already doing work down there. The second one is managed by the Center for Popular Democracy, and it's the Maria Relief and Recovery Fund. If you go to themariafund.org, so it's mariafund, FUND.org, you will also, that's also an organization that will get money to right. entities that are already doing work on the ground and are committed to a long-term restructuring and reconstruction of Puerto Rico.
Senator, I'm really hopeful that the next time we talk, we'll be able to say, oh, good, things have worked out a little better, and the island is on the way to recovery, but I'm not even going to ask you about long-term because we have some immediate concerns. I do want to thank you for your time today, and thank you on behalf of all humanity. Again, you know, people say, well, it's a Puerto Rican issue. No. This is everybody's issue. These are, you know, American citizens, and they just deserve the opportunity to live fruitful lives and get a chance to resurrect their lives after this terrible tragedy. Senator, thanks for your time, and we'll certainly see you. And I appreciate
you putting time on this, sir. Thank you.
No problem, of course. So we'll take a short break. We thank the Senator. We're going to be back with the editor of the Riverdale Press. We'll talk about some of the same hurricane relief efforts and some of the other interesting things that are in that paper this week. Don't go away.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self, and I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family? This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort...
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything.
Oh, sorry.
Go long, son!
It's always worth it.
Whoa! Master!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
Hamilton was adopted from a rescue in 2008. He really likes to be around people. And as soon as I start to make my breakfast, Hamilton is right there. I get out my mat and I'm doing a downward dog and he's underneath. He's quite the pug about town. He gets invited to a lot of parties. He knows he's a pretty big deal. I mean, look at this little face. How could you not love him?
Hey, back with you on the Bronx Buzz, and we do thank Senator Gustavo Rivera for joining us. Right now, let us go to the Northwest Bronx and say hello, good evening to Michael Hinman, who's the editor of the Riverdale Press. Nice to have you with us again, Michael.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
No problem. So we just talked with Senator Rivera, who, again, just repeated what I guess we all know, that things in Puerto Rico are not doing well. You had some kind of interesting stories in the Riverdale Press this week about Puerto Rico, people trying to be in touch. Why don't you rehash some of what that's about, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, one of our reporters, Julius Constantine Model, he did a great story where he talked to a couple here in Riverdale where Mayra was somebody who had family in Puerto Rico, and as the storm was hitting, they were trying to do whatever they could to keep contact. And then after the eye passed, that was the last they heard from them. And it's a very good story, just talking about the waiting game. The waiting game in terms of trying to reconnect after a storm, if everybody's okay, and not panicking over all the different news that's out there.
Let me just interject. What I think happens with these kinds of things, and it's just a horrible thing, is that you hear numbers and you say, well, there isn't any water. But if you can put a face on it, if you can say, this is about you, this is about me, this is about our neighbors, this is about our families, I think it really makes the impact, unfortunately, come to life. So, I really appreciate you doing that, because it's not the kind of thing that you normally do in your paper, taking on those kinds of global issues. But you really did a great job at putting a face on it. The other thing that you did, which is just adorable, was the lemonade story. And so, if we can transition a little bit from what is really a terrible tragedy to that, why don't you just talk about the kids who set up a lemonade stand?
Yeah, we have a co-op over here in our Spite and Dival area. Excuse me, known as Winston Churchill, and these kids. Every year, these young kids, they're young entrepreneurs. They get together and they sell lemonade. It's their way of trying to learn about business, make a little bit of money on the side. And but this time they decided to donate all their funds to relief efforts in Puerto Rico. And a lot of people came out, and I think they raised more than $500.
Isn't that wonderful?
Great kids just do lemonade.
Yeah, and you know what else? Listen, if it's our kids, we've got to teach them the right things. Now look at all they've learned and what they've done, and they'll feel good about doing something. And, of course, having media and great media like the Riverdale Press celebrate them on the front page, it's just phenomenal. I want to move to another serious story that is somewhat eye-opening. This was by Anthony Capote, and we'll talk about the fact that he's no longer with the paper. For good reasons. It's not like anything happened. He certainly was
nothing happened to him.
Yeah, he certainly was a superb reporter for you. But he interviewed Terrence O'Toole, who is the captain of the 50th Precinct. And I'm just going to read this quote, which is right off the top of the paper there. This was about the police officer who was seen on viral video, frankly, just beating up somebody he was arresting. And what the captain said, according to Anthony's article in the Riverdale Press, he's going to fight with police for the rest of his life, guaranteed. And the next cop that he encounters may have to shoot him because he's going to fail to comply, because that is going to be his lifestyle forever. You know, whether it's true or not, or whether the young man involved really, has some very serious issues, is it not completely inappropriate for a police captain to make that kind of a statement?
Well, me personally, it worries me to hear that. And I don't think Terrence is trying to say anything nasty. I don't think he's trying to be provocative in any way. But I think, though, that for me to hear that from law enforcement, because to me, the use of such force, of pulling out your weapon and shooting somebody, that should be the absolute last thing you should ever consider, not the
absolutely.
first.
Right. And it's just, what I guess is disturbing about it is that if that's his attitude, it makes it difficult to kind of do the job without some extracurricular, it's almost like when the president said, you know what, before you put the guy in the cop car, give him the business. It's just not good police work. I mean, that's my own evaluation of it.
Yeah, I mean, and their job is to serve and protect. Their job is to go out and arrest criminals, but the courts are who are supposed to be prosecuting these guys. They dole out the punishments, not the police. So to say, it's one thing to use force in order to stop them from hurting somebody,
right,
but at some point you have to wonder, when is it too much?
Yeah, and then by him saying that, you wonder if that young man or another who is perceived in the same way gets treated badly by police. There's almost this kind of unstated thing that, well, the precinct captain knows that, it's kind of okay for us to behave like that. I just felt really uncomfortable about it, and frankly, I thought Anthony did a great job with the story. I do want to ask you about it. So Anthony left. You know that I'm his friend as well, and he is involved in a PhD program and no longer really had the time to be a reporter for the Riverdale Press. But you wrote a piece, and you sound like you're really enthusiastic about the reporter that's taking his place. So why don't you shout about a new reporter, and then I'm going to be real annoying and bring him on here in the Buzz so everybody can meet him eventually.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure he would love to meet you as well. But yeah, his name is Zach Costro. He's actually born and raised in the city. He's somebody who went to Columbia, got his master's from Columbia, but in between his undergraduate and his master's degree, he actually was a bartender. I mean, and he's somebody who would hear stories and such all the time, and just something he kind of fell into, and just something he just did for a while, and he realized that he could find a way of telling those stories, and so he went back to school, got his master's degree in journalism. And I mean, when he first connected with me when I was in the search for Tony's replacement, he just absolutely blew me away.
Right.
I mean, I'm so excited about him. You have no idea how excited.
You know what interests me? I mean, and you prior to coming to the Bronx and the Riverdale Press also had kind of a varied career. That yes, you were involved in media and you're involved in news, but some of your experiences were outside that realm. And they come into play, to me, in some ways that almost makes the best reporter, as opposed to somebody who's just kind of been a journalist and then went to grad school and now is a journalist. Some of those experiences really come into play, is what I guess I'm saying.
You have to live life in order to report on life, I think, and it's a lot easier if you've lived through those things and done various things and experienced those things, and it's much easier to tell those stories.
Yeah, that's great. Listen, we're going to have to get going, but I do want to thank you for joining us, taking the time out to be with us. And we'll both say, pick up the Riverdale Press. It's on your newsstand. Look for it online. It's an award-winning paper, and literally from the first day to this day, there's always something worthwhile reading. We didn't get to talk about your very interesting editorial, but we'll get to all those things the next time we have you around.
Sounds great. Thanks, Gary.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Folks, that wraps us up for today. That is Michael Hinman, the editor of the Riverdale Press, and a really fascinating paper this week, literally with the stories that we talked about. There's also a story about 5731 Broadway, which is a very controversial project, which seems to be moving forward, so you get all the insight on all that stuff. So that's it, right? We're done? We will see you next week for the Bronx Buzz. This Monday night, we'll be doing a political debate in the 13th Council District on Bronx Talk, so that'll be Monday night at 9 o'clock. Good night. See you.
Of Rikers in American Jail documentary takes place at the Andrew Freeman home, where a panel discussion including 5 Malamak and Robert Johnson defined the crisis of mass incarceration in the United States. New York's Rikers Island is a prime example to shed light on this crisis.
Today was very vital because we have a battle with Rikers Island right now, currently taking place is more in the media on the front page, but it's also taking place at city council's hearings, board of corrections hearings. So it's important for the people in the community to understand that public comment is important right now, to be able to have an opinion about Rikers.
The documentary brings you face to face with stories told by men and women who endured incarceration at Rikers Island. In the panel discussion, Robert Johnson talks about his experience at Rikers.
The only thing that Rikers Island did for me was give me pain, misery, and suffering. And then when I came out, I had no more than what I went in there, which was with nothing. I hope that some people understand clearly the reality of what I'm talking about, apply it to themselves, and hopefully learn that if I can change, then they can too.
The message on the crisis of mass incarceration was well received by listeners.
What I saw here was multiple generations of people affected by mass incarceration, but also stepping up to try to change the face of mass incarceration by advocating community control over those processes, which communities just don't have. It's a top-down system, and what we had here today were really powerful folks talking about ways that we can take the power back as people concerned about people in the community, not just concerned about, political office and donors.
In an effort to give in the public information about the human toll of this crisis, the Rikers in American Jail screening did just that. From BronxNet, this is Ashley Tiffany.
What you see here is a Bronx native pop-up shop. We're going to be here for 2 weeks. We're at 127 Lincoln Avenue. And, we're a brand that embraces and highlights the Bronx and embodies what the Bronx truly is.
In an effort to encapsulate the Bronx's culture and energy, the Bronx native uses various forms of the arts to communicate the borough's happenings.
We are a community-based brand, right? We don't only sell apparel and sell Bronx-based merchandise, but we make a difference in our community. We tackle issues of social justice, and we tackle issues that hurt the Bronx. We tackle issues that the Bronx goes through every day.
We're gonna have spoken word. We're gonna have events talking about DACA, working with different Bronx organizations, artists, designers, just overall creatives in the Bronx.
Hip-hop, graffiti, the subway, stylish streetwear, and images of well-known artists born and raised in the Bronx are some of the displays in the pop-up shop that eager clients will be able to witness. This exciting event runs from October 2nd to 15th at 127 Lincoln Avenue in the Bronx. The shop doors are open at 9 a.m., and for further information, you can go ahead and visit the site at www.bronxnative.com. From BronxNet, this is Shanice Powell.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. It's like, hello, that's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.